Earlier in the evening all had joined in the fun. In the general hilarity there had seemed to be a difference only in bulk between grandfather and baby. Indeed, a shade of solemn expectation now and then flitting across the faces of the younger members had made them seem rather more thoughtful than their elders. Now the spirit of fun reigned supreme. The very flames danced and capered in the polished grate. A pair of prim candles that had been staring at the astral lamp began to wink at other candles far away in the mirrors. There was a long bell rope suspended from the ceiling in the corner, made of glass beads netted over a cord nearly as thick as your wrist. It generally hung in the shadow and made no sign. But tonight it twinkled from end to end. Its handle of crimson glass sent reckless dashes of red at the papered wall, turning its dainty blue stripes into purple. Passers-by halted to catch the merry laughter floating through curtain and sash into the street, then skipped on their way with a startled consciousness that the village was wide awake. At last matters grew so uproarious that the grandsire's red handkerchief came down from his face with a jerk. What decent old gentleman could sleep in such a racket? Mynheer van Glyck regarded his children with astonishment. The baby even showed symptoms of hysterics. It was high time to attend to business. Madam suggested that if they wished to see old good St. Nicholas, they should sing the same loving invitation that had brought him the year before. The baby stared and thrust his fist into his mouth as Mynheer put him down upon the floor. Soon he sat erect and looked with a sweet scowl at the company. With his lace and embroideries, his crown of blue ribbon and whalebone, for he was not quite past the tumbling age, he looked like the king of the babies. The other children, each holding a pretty willow basket, formed at once in a ring and moved slowly around the little fellow, lifting their eyes meanwhile, for the saint to whom they were about to address themselves was yet in mysterious quarters. Madam commenced playing softly upon the piano. Soon the voices rose, gentle, youthful voices, rendered all the sweeter for their tremor. Welcome, friend St. Nicholas, welcome, bring no rod for us tonight. While our voices bid thee welcome, every heart with joy is light. Tell us every fault and failing, we will bear thy keenest railing. So we sing, thou shalt tell us everything. Welcome, friend St. Nicholas, welcome, welcome to this merry band. Happy children greet thee, welcome, thou art gladdening all the land. Fill each empty hand and basket, 'tis thy little ones who ask it. So we sing, thou wilt bring us everything. During the chorus, sundry glances, half in eagerness, half in dread, had been cast toward the polished folding doors. Now a loud knocking was heard. The circle was broken in an instant. Some of the little ones, with a strange mixture of fear and delight, pressed against their mother's knee. Grandfather bent forward with his chin resting upon his hand. Grandmother lifted her spectacles. Mynheer van Glyck, seated by the fireplace, slowly drew his meerschaum from his mouth, while Hilda and the other children settled themselves beside him in an expectant group. The knocking was heard again. "Come in," said Madame softly. The door opened slowly, and St. Nicholas, in full array, stood before them. You could have heard a pin drop. Soon he spoke, with a mysterious majesty in his voice, with kindliness in his tones. "Karel van Glyck, I am pleased to greet thee, and thy honored Frau Katrina, and thy son and his good Frau Annie. Children, I greet ye all, Hendrik, Hilda, Vroom, Katie, Huygens, Lucretia, and thy cousins Wolfert, Dietrich, Maiken, Volst, and Katrina. Good children ye have been, in the main, since I last accosted you. Dietrich was rude at the Haarlem Fair last fall, but he has tried to atone for it since. Maiken has failed of late in her lessons, and too many sweets and trifles have gone to her lips, and too few stivers into her charity box. Dietrich, I trust, will be a polite, manly boy for the future, and Maiken will endeavor to shine as a student. Let her remember, too, that economy and thrift are needed in the foundation of a worthy and generous life. Little Katy has been cruel to the cat more than once. St. Nicholas can hear the cat cry when its tail is pulled. I will forgive her, if she will remember from this hour that the smallest dumb creatures have feelings, and must not be abused." As Katy burst into a frightened cry, the saint graciously remained silent until she was soothed. "Master Vroom," he resumed, "I warn thee that boys who are in the habit of putting snuff upon the foot stove of the schoolmistress may one day be discovered and receive a flogging." Master Broom coloured and stared in great astonishment. "But thou art such an excellent scholar, I shall make thee no further reproof. Thou, Hendrik, didst distinguish thyself in archery match last spring, and hit the duel, though the bird was swung before thee to unsteady thine eye. I give thee credit for excelling in manly sports and exercise, though I must not unduly countenance thy boat racing, since it leaves thee too little time for thy proper studies. Lucretia and Hilda shall have a blessed sleep tonight." The consciousness of kindness to the poor, devotion in their souls, and cheerful, hearty obedience to household rule will render them happy. With one and all I avow myself well content. Goodness, industry, benevolence, and thrift have prevailed in your midst. Therefore my blessing upon you, and may the new year find all treading the paths of obedience, wisdom, and love. Tomorrow you shall find more substantial proofs that I have been in your midst. Farewell." With these words came a great shower of sugar plums upon a linen sheet spread out in front of the doors. A general scramble followed. The children fairly tumbled over each other in their eagerness to fill their baskets. Madame cautiously held the baby down in their midst till the chubby little fists were filled. Then the bravest of the youngsters sprang up and burst open the closed doors. In vain they peered into the mysterious apartment. St. Nicholas was nowhere to be seen. Soon there was a general rush to another room, where stood a table covered with the finest and whitest of linen damask. Each child in a flutter of excitement laid a shoe upon it. The door was then carefully locked, and its key hidden in the mother's bedroom. Next followed good-night kisses, and a grand family procession to the upper floor. Merry farewells at bedroom doors, and silence at last reigned in the Van Glyck mansion. Early the next morning the door was solemnly unlocked, and opened in the presence of the assembled household, when, lo, a sight appeared, proving St. Nicholas to be a saint of his word. Every shoe was filled to overflowing, and beside each stood many a colorful pile. The table was heavy with its load of presents, candies, toys, trinkets, books, and other articles. Everyone had gifts, from the grandfather down to the baby. Little Katy clapped her hands with glee and vowed inwardly that the cat should never know another moment's grief. Hendrik capered about the room, flourishing a superb bow and arrows above his head. Hilda laughed with delight as she opened a crimson box and drew forth its glittering contents. The rest chuckled and said, "Oh," and "Ah," over their treasures, very much as we did here in America on last Christmas Day. With her glittering necklace in her hands and a pile of books in her arms, Hilda stole toward her parents and held up her beaming face for a kiss. There was such an earnest, tender look in her bright eyes that her mother breathed a blessing as she leaned over her. "I am delighted with this book. Thank you, Father," she said, touching the top one with her chin. "I shall read it all day long." "Eh, sweetheart," said mein Herr, "you cannot do better. There is no one like Father Katz. If my daughter learns his moral emblems by heart, the mother and I may keep silent. The work you have there is the emblems, his best work. You will find it enriched with rare engravings from Van de Venne. Considering that the back of the book was turned away, mine Herr certainly showed a surprising familiarity with an unopened volume presented by St. Nicholas. It was strange, too, that the saint should have found certain things made by the elder children and had actually placed them upon the table, and labeled with parents' and grandparents' names. But all were too much absorbed in happiness to notice these slight inconsistencies. Hilda saw in her father's face the rapt expression he always wore when he spoke of Jacob Katz. So she put her armful of books upon the table and resigned herself to listen. Old Father Katz, my child, was a great poet, not a writer of plays like the Englishman Shakespeare, who lived in his time. I have read them in German, and very good they are, very, very good, but not like Father Katz. Katz sees no daggers in the air. He has no white women falling in love with dusky Moors, no young fools sighing to be a lady's glove, no crazy princes mistaking respectable old gentlemen for rats. No, no. He writes only sense. It is great wisdom in little bundles, a bundle for every day of your life. You can guide a state with Katz's poems, and you can put a baby to sleep with his pretty songs. He was one of the greatest men of Holland. When I take you to The Hague, I will show you the Kloosterkerk where he lies buried. There was a man for you to study, my sons. He was good through and through. What did he say? O Lord, let me obtain this from thee, to live with patience and to die with pleasure. Did patience mean folding his hands? No, he was a lawyer, statesman, ambassador, farmer, philosopher, historian, and poet. He was keeper of the Great Seal of Holland. He was a, "Bah, there's too much noise here, I cannot talk." And mine Herr looked with astonishment into the bowl of his meerschaum, for it had gone out, nodded to his Frau, and left the apartment in great haste. The fact is, his discourse had been accompanied throughout with subdued chorus of barking dogs and squeaking cats and bleating lambs, to say nothing of a noisy ivory cricket that the baby was whirling in infinite delight. At the last, little Huygens, taking advantage of the increasing loudness of Mein Herr's tones, had ventured to blast on his new trumpet, and Wolfert had hastily attempted an accompaniment on the drum. This had brought matters to a crisis, and well for the little creatures that it had. The saint had left no ticket for them to attend a lecture on Jacob Katz. It was not an appointed part of the ceremonies. Therefore, when the youngsters saw that the mother looked neither frightened nor offended, they gathered new courage. The grand chorus rose triumphant, and frolic and joy reigned supreme. Good St. Nicholas, for the sake of the young Hollanders, I, for one, am willing to acknowledge him and defend his reality against all unbelievers. Karl Schummel was quite busy during that day, assuring little children confidently that not St. Nicholas, but their own fathers and mothers had produced the oracle and loaded the tables. And yet, if this were a saint, why did he not visit the Brinker cottage that night? And why was that one home so dark and sorrowful bypassed? "Are we all here?" cried Peter and Heidi Glee as a party assembled upon the canal early the next morning, equipped for their skating journey. "Let me see. As Jacob has made me captain, I must call the roll. Karl Schummel, you here?" "Ja." "Jacob Put?" "Ja." "Benjamin Dobbs?" "Ja." "Lambert van Moden?" "Ja." "That's lucky. Couldn't get on without you, as you're the only one who can speak English." "Ludwig van Hoop?" "Ja." "Wosten Valbert Schimmelpenning?" No answer. The little rogue has been kept at home. Now, boys, it's just 8 o'clock, glorious weather, and the Y is as firm as a rock. We'll be in Amsterdam in 30 minutes. 1, 2, 3, start! True enough. In less than an hour, less than a half hour, they had crossed a dike of solid masonry and were in the very heart of the great metropolis of Netherlands, a walled city of 95 islands and nearly 200 bridges. Although Ben had been there twice since his arrival in Holland, he saw much to excite wonder. But his Dutch comrades, having lived nearby all their lives, considered it most a matter of course place in the world. Everything interested Ben. The tall houses with their forked chimneys and gable ends facing the street, the merchants' warerooms perched high up under the roofs of their dwellings, with long arm-like cranes hoisting and lowering goods past the household windows, the grand public buildings erected upon wooden piles driven deep into the marshy ground, the narrow streets, the canals everywhere crossing the city, the bridges, the locks, the various costumes, and, strangest of all, shops and dwellings crouching close to the fronts of the churches, sending their long, disproportionate chimneys far upward along the sacred walls. If he looked up, he saw tall, leaning houses seeming to pierce the sky with their shining roofs. If he looked down, there was a queer street, without crossing or curb, nothing to separate the cobblestone pavement from the footpath of brick. If he rested his eyes halfways, he saw complicated little mirrors fastened upon the outside of nearly every window, so arranged that the inmates of the house could observe all that was going on in the street, or inspect whoever might be knocking at the door, without being seen themselves. Sometimes a dog-cart, heaped with wooden ware, passed him, then a donkey, bearing a pair of panniers filled with crockery or glass, then a sled drawn over bare cobblestones, the runners kept greased with dripping oil rags so that it might run easily, and then perhaps a showy but clumsy family carriage drawn by the brownest of Flanders horses, swinging the whitest of snowy tails. The city was in full festival array. Every shop was gorgeous in honor of St. Nicholas. Captain Peter was forced more than once to order his men away from the tempting show windows, where everything that has been or can be thought of in the way of toys was displayed. Holland is famous for this branch of manufacture. Every possible thing is copied in miniature for the benefit of the little ones. The intricate mechanical toys that a Dutch youngster tumbles about in solid unconcern would create a stir in our patent office. Ben laughed outright at some of the mimic fishing boats. They were so heavy and stumpy, so like the queer craft he had seen about Rotterdam. The tiny trekschieten, however only a foot or two long, fitted out complete, made his heart ache. He so longed to buy one at once for his little brother in England. He had no money to spare, for with true Dutch prudence the party had agreed to take with them merely the sum required for each boy's expenses, and to consign the purse to Peter for safekeeping. Consequently, Master Ben concluded to devote all his energies to sightseeing, and to think as seldom as possible of little Robbie. He made a hasty call at the marine school and envied the sailor students their full-rigged brig and their sleeping berths swung over their trunks or lockers. He peeped into the Jews' quarter of the city, where the rich diamond cutters and squalid old clothesmen dwell, and wisely resolved to keep away from it. He also enjoyed hasty glimpses of the four principal avenues of Rotterdam: the Prinsengracht, the Keizersgracht, the Herengracht, and Singel. These are semicircle in form, and the first three average more than 2 miles in length. The canal runs through the center of each, with a well-paved road on either side, lined with stately buildings. Rows of naked elms bordering the canal cast a network of shadows over its frozen surface, and everything was so clean and bright that Ben told Lambert it seemed to him like petrified neatness. Fortunately, the weather was cold enough to put a stop to the usual street flooding and window washing, or our young excursionists might have been drenched more than once. Sweeping, mopping, and scrubbing form a passion with the Dutch housewives, and to soil their spotless mansions is considered scarcely less than a crime. everywhere a hearty contempt is felt for those who neglect to rub the soles of their shoes to a polish before crossing the door-sill. And in certain places, visitors are expected to remove their heavy shoes before entering. Sir William Temple, in his memoirs of What Passed in Christendom from 1672 to 1679, tells the story of a pompous magistrate going to visit a lady in Amsterdam. A stout Holland lass opened the door and told him in a breath that the lady was at home and that his shoes were not very clean. Without another word, she took the astonished man up in both arms, threw him across her back, carried him through 2 rooms, set him down at the bottom of the stairs, seized a pair of slippers that stood there, and put them upon his feet. Then, and only then, did she speak, telling him that her mistress was on the floor above, and he might go up. Well, while Ben was skating with his friends upon the crowded canals of the city, he found it difficult to believe that the sleepy Dutchmen he saw around him, smoking their pipes so leisurely, and looking as though their hats might be knocked off their heads without their making any resistance, were capable of those outbreaks that had taken place in Holland, that they were really fellow countrymen of the brave, devoted heroes of whom he had read in Dutch history. As his party skimmed lightly along, he told Van Moonen of the burial riot which in 1696 had occurred in that very city, where the women and children turned out as well as the men, and formed mock funeral processions through the town to show the burgomasters that certain new regulations with regard to burying the dead would not be acceded to. How at last they grew so unmanageable and threatened so much damage to the city that the burgomaster was glad to recall the offensive law. "There's the corner," said Jacob, pointing to some large buildings, where about 15 years ago the great corn houses sank down in the mud. They were strong affairs and set up on good piles, but they had over 70,000 hundredweight of corn in them, and that was too much. It was a long story for Jacob to tell, and he stopped to rest. "How do you know there were 70,000 hundredweight in them?" asked Carl sharply. "You were in your swaddling clothes then." "My father knows all about it," was Jacob's suggestive reply. Rousing himself with an effort, he continued, "Ben likes pictures. Show him some." "All right," said the captain. "If we had time, Benjamin," said Lambert van Moonen in English, "I should like to take you to the City Hall, or the Stadhuis. There are building piles for you there. It's built on nearly 14,000 of them, driven 70 feet into the ground. But what I wish you to see there is the big picture of Van Speyk blowing up his ship. Great picture." "Van who?" asked Ben. "Van Speyk, don't you remember? He was in the height of an engagement with the Belgians, and when he found that they had the better of him and would capture his ship, he blew it up, and himself too, rather than yield." "Wasn't that Van Tromp?" "Oh, no. Van Tromp was another brave fellow, all right. They've a monument to him down in Delfshaven, the place where the Pilgrims took ship for America." "Well, what about Van Tromp? He was a great Dutch admiral, wasn't he?" "Yes. He was in more than 30 sea fights. He beat the Spanish fleet and an English one, and then fastened a broom to his masthead to show that he had swept the English from the sea.